You all look very formal, but hopefully we'll have a little bit more of an informal chat. And I know some people will start wandering in later because they probably haven't had breakfast yet, and so they'll start to come in a little bit. I would like to not take too much time because I'm looking forward to hearing August and Calvin talk, actually, rather than hear myself talk. I was just here to share a few words with you at the beginning to sort of set this up, and if you don't mind, actually, I'm going to start by just wandering off the topic immediately and come back to what I was going to talk about, which is more related to how to go through a business case and how to look at an environmental case. My interest in looking at environmental topics in business goes back quite a long way. And my motivation for this is that I don't think you get enough of this in your formal business education. And I'd just like to share with you, these are my personal thoughts, but on why we don't include environment into our consideration of how to do business. A long time ago, I studied the history of business. And when you look back to where our business models come from, most of it derives from around 1850 to 1900. That was kind of the formation period. And that was the time, no, I know you can't think back to that time, but think America, 1850, right? You remember like movies, big empty country, Indians and cowboys and railways and railway robberies, stagecoach, that sort of thing, right? Think back to that time. A big empty country, first building the railways, environment wasn't the problem, right? Resources, as many resources as you could imagine. You know, gold, oil, steel, everything was possible there. No consideration whatsoever was necessary about the environment, and you had a huge empty country. It wasn't empty. They basically annihilated the indigenous populations to make it empty, but it became empty, and they could expand as much as possible. We had mass production. We built the railways first, then the telecommunication systems. Then they started mining the country, creating steel, or around early 1905, 1906, the first combustion engine was built. Right, the rest of it was steam and coal. Right, then mass production, and then the development of what we consider to be scientific management. Mass production forever, mass consumption forever, no consideration whatsoever of the environment. We hardened all that in your business education. Your business education, what we teach you today, basically goes back to 1908, which is when Harvard formally introduced its MBA. And the way I look at it, not much has changed since. So basically, you're getting a very, very good 1908 education in how to treat the world and the environment. And you only have one way to think about it, right? Your business education is almost as old as the keyboard. Right? You know, those little, you've got one. How many of you have your iPhones here, your smartphones? Right? There's the keyboard on there was designed in 1870. The keyboard on your smartphone was designed in 1870 and hasn't changed. There are much better versions out there. You still have the same keyboard. Why? Because it's very, very difficult to change. And that's why in your education today, you don't get enough of the changes that have taken place. So I was asked, what is eco-business? And I just think it's actually very simple, in fact. It's just that the way you look at the world is so deeply embedded in your conceptual models and all your habits. The first thing to think about when you're looking at an environmental case is, or any environmental opportunity, right, is to think about how interconnected it is. Right? When you think about the mobile phone, I usually think as far as, okay, I got my little mobile phone. Right, where did I get this? Well, I think about the store I got it from, and I think about the brand. I don't think about where the raw minerals came for this thing. I don't think about where the water was used in the manufacture of this phone. I don't think about the waste that was produced along the way. I don't think about any of the people that touched it. So many people touched this thing, but I don't have any knowledge or any interest in who touched it or why they touched it. So the interconnectedness is the first thing that we miss whenever we think about any sort of environmental project. Second is, we don't think about this as a system, right? We think about it as this, the furthest we get in our system is supply chain, value chain, right? The stuff that you're taught in business. That's as far as we go. But we don't think about it as sitting in a larger system. You don't think about the economies, or the society in which it came from. You don't think about the forests and the ecosystems that are involved, right? Involved in this, if you think far back enough, is, earth. Out of earth come trees, flowers, the natural environment that used to be there before we stuck a bulldozer inside and took it out. You don't think about any of those things. So you start to think about this as a system, and you see lots of opportunities. And the last one, my principles, is that you have to justify whatever you're doing whenever you talk to people in language that they understand. So if I come here and I talk to you about the eco-spirituality, right? I talk to you about, the benefits to mankind. You don't understand that. If I'm talking to business people, I have to talk in the language they understand, which is usually finance. And sometimes it's very difficult to embed environmental discussions into a financial background. So if you're starting on your case, I have to walk around here so I can remember what I saw, so I have to walk around. You might want to start out with thinking about what are the drivers behind. Why on earth do you want to even incorporate some environmental decisions into what you're doing? So just think about how do you get started? What are the drivers behind it? You need a business case, right? It's not enough just to want to do good. And it's wonderful that you do want to do good, but it's not enough just to want to do good. You have to have a solid business case behind that. And that, we'll talk about business models in just a second. What tools and frameworks do you have to use? Now, obviously, you don't have too many tools available to you right now, so you have to use a lot of common sense. But you can look at the triple bottom line is a very simple one, right? Looking at the environmental, the social, and the economic impacts of a project. You can even start with that. This is a very utilitarian way to go about it. You need a baseline. The baseline really refers to just where do you start, where are you going, and how do you get there from here? So it's just setting out some metrics. What's your baseline year? When are you going to start? What sort of goals do you have at the beginning? So you need to measure what sort of measurements you have, and then what are your targets? And then making sure that you're able to have a feedback loop inside there, so you can measure how far you've gone and how far to go. Where to start? Most companies have some what they call low-hanging fruit, some opportunities where it's easy to get into environmental issues. So you might want to take a look at your case and say, okay, where do I begin? Now, where in here is the easiest place for me to get in? It's so big if I look at this thing, right? I kind of look at the whole thing. So where's the place where we can have the greatest impact for the least cost or for the least change, potentially? Scale, wow. It's always difficult to do everything at once. The world is not ready for everything at once, so you have to decide on how much impact can you have. It's not possible to do everything, so you have to pick and choose, because everything comes with usually a fight and some costs, so you have to decide. And what resources do you need? And this doesn't refer just to financial resources, right? But obviously you have to consider how much your seed cost is going to be, how much input you need over the years. But you also need people, right? It depends on what you need to change. If you need to change something very small, then you probably don't need to have everybody on board. You can probably make a change without it. But if you need to make something substantially different and it's very big, then you probably need you need a lion in the closet. You need somebody else behind you. It could be government, it could be a specific backer, it could be the local community. You need somebody behind you. So what sort of resources do you need, please? So I thought, let's start out by taking a look at business models. You know the basic elements of a business model, which is your value, what value are you creating, what target segment do you have, your value chain of activities, the cost structure of what you're trying to do, your positioning in your value network, your strategy, and those kind of the basic elements. There's other ones, but that's kind of the basic thinking tools, right? So I said, please, just go around that little line is supposed to point to value up there, right? So when you look at the value that you're creating, right? First off, who are you creating value for? That's one thing. So if you are going to change your model to be a greener model, right? The first question is, who are you creating value for? How do you create your value? Where does the value come in? If you're going to have, so you already have an existing business model. This is what I'm thinking, right? You've got an existing business model, right? Could Could be a hotel, it could be a resort, it could be anything else, it could be mobile phones, right? But how do you create your value right now? And if you add environment in there and consideration for the natural environment, how does that impact the value creation? Are there other sources of value that you can create? Can you create multiple revenue streams out of this? Can you differentiate the value? Can you create a new target? Can you find different ways to extract value than you did in the past? Right, number one. Right. I have to go quickly because we've got lots of stuff. And each one of these is a book in itself. So the next one is, please, segments. Right. So if you're targeting a specific segment, can you expand that segment? Will the impact of the environment decrease that segment? Can you find other segments in there that will also provide value to your firm? Value chain. Now there's lots of things in the value chain that we could spend time on, but for the most part, right, when you look at the value chain, there's this whole stream of activities, right? You know, a resort is not just a resort. There's a huge number of inputs and outputs that are related to that resort, right? Where in there will you focus? What activities are the most significantly impacted by an environmental consideration? Right? And how can you improve the work, the coordination across the value chain? Often there's a lot of benefits can be extracted just by working more efficiently in the value chain. So where do you want to put your efforts? Where can you make the biggest impact in the value chain? Cost structure. Usually one of the lowest hanging fruit in any environmental activity is just improving efficiency, energy efficiency. That's usually a kind of a starting point. But really there's behind that is, can you improve the cost drivers? Is there some way that the environment or consideration of the natural environment impacts the cost drivers behind this? And this could be positive or negative. Sometimes if you're going to include the environment, it actually may increase the cost, in which case you have to justify that and find a way where they've increased the cost, maybe it actually multiplies the revenues. There might be something in there that you can work with. And if you have costs, are they going to be a one-time cost or a recurring cost? Do you have to do something one time, like introducing solar panels or whatever, but are there also going to be recurring costs that it will impact? And finally, second to final, positioning. If you were going to include environment and consideration of the natural environment into your system and your company's ecosystem, often that changes the role. If you include NGOs into your business plan, right, how is that going to change the structure? If you're going to put them on your board, how does that change the distribution of power? If you're going to work with a supplier that's very important to you, does this mean you're becoming increasingly dependent upon one specific supplier? What impact does it have on the constellation of companies that you're dealing with? And finally, who do you need on board? Right? If you're going to do this, and you're going to do something significantly different, often you need to have somebody on board that will protect you, support you, have influence, and make the difference in getting things done. You might want to consider that. Okay, and finally is your strategy. And strategy is a huge topic, but usually companies compete in relatively standardized ways. You know, your lowest cost, your highest value, you are very flexible as a company, vertical integration, those are kind of the standard ways. But how do you want to compete? You have to ask yourself, if you're going to include the environment in there, how does this change the way you compete? Is there something that, what is your strategy? How are you going to be differentiated from the other firms? What is your competitive edge going to be over other firms that are competing in the same space? When you think about environment, and you also have to try to get out of your head the traditional ways that you've been taught. So I'm sort of exhorting you, the people in this room, to start to think differently about how you view your business models. So in the past, we always think of business as sort of a very linear system, right? Stuff comes in, you change it around, you transform it, and then you send it out and you sell it. Peace. Another way to look at this is that's very short-term thinking, right? When you think, in, out, make your buck, put it on your bottom line, done, right? That's very short-term. If you think long-term, right, and I think anything to do with if you're building a property or anything like that is long-term thinking. you might want to think differently. And this is one of them. This is closing your loop. In the European Union, many companies are being required by law to actually take back in the products at the end of their life cycle. And then transform that or do something with that and report on what they're doing with the recycled products. With a hotel, it's different, but long term, if you think outside the short-term thinking and think long-term, you can also see that there's also going to be closed loops in there. So finally, my thoughts to you are, as you go through this, and I'm very glad you're doing it, I know that over the day, hopefully there'll be more of you involved in this. Next year, hopefully they'll consider doing something like this again, and there'll be more opportunities to spread the word. That think as if the environment matters, not only in this case, but maybe when you go through your other business classes, your engineering classes or sciences. You start to think as if environment matters and see how that changes the system. Think big. Think outside the immediate firm. Think into the deep interconnections that everything has, that laptop that you have, that iPod, the cameras, the smartphones that you have, right? Just look at it as a system. Think outside that particular device, and start to think bigger. Take a look to see where in there the natural environment actually enters. When you do that, you also develop a certain understanding of the environment that you don't get if you're sitting in a classroom inside UST. Right? You think outside that, and you see the world differently. Think change. None of this is actually, my deep feeling is actually we're not going to change the world or improve the world by trying to consume ourselves to a safer, more environmental world. I don't think that is even possible. So you're going to have to start thinking about how to change the system in order to make this work. And finally, I'm always impressed with people that can start to look ahead and think beyond their immediate needs. So think long term. Don't think short term. Don't think 2 years. Start looking into the future. And then hopefully you'll come up with some interesting ideas that will carry you through your own careers. Now I'd like to turn this over to people that know a lot more about this and have some very interesting stories to tell, I hope. I'm done with my part. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Professor Forster. Please take your seat.